Once again, welcome to Star Eye Recaps. Passengers is a 2016 sci-fi, romance, and drama movie that I'll be showing you today. Beware of spoilers. Take care and be cautious. One can observe the interstellar spaceship Avalon traveling through space on its way to the Homestead 2 colonized world. The ship is on autopilot, and every one of its compartments is empty. Both the 5,000 passengers and the 258 crew members are dormant. The ship is having its shields weakened as it passes through an asteroid belt suddenly. The main shield is given power, but the ship is headed straight for a massive asteroid. The ship suddenly collides with the asteroid, resulting in numerous problems. One of the hibernation pods activates as the ship starts its own repairs. Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer, was the passenger who was awakened. An automated system assists with his awakening as his pod opens, informing him that he has been in suspended animation for 120 years, and that the ship is only 4 months away from Homestead 2. He is informed that he can use that time to take advantage of the luxurious features of the ship. Prior to his arrival on the planet, Jim is given instructions regarding his ID band, his cabin, and the main activities he must participate in. He gets ready, leaves his cabin, and enters an automated class intended for a large group of learners while feeling both anxious and excited to meet the other passengers. The hologram describes Earth as being overpopulated, overpriced, and overrated while Jim shows signs of anxiety. It instructs him to reserve his questions for after the lesson, but Jim can't stop wondering why he's the only one present. He goes looking for other people after realizing that the hologram is unable to respond to him. He arrives at the ship's main concourse. Although there is no one present, an automated information desk offers assistance. When Jim requests to speak with a real person, he is sent to speak with a steward. However, when he arrives and no one is there, he requests to speak with the captain. Even though he is unable to enter, he can see that none of the main crew members are awake when he arrives at the bridge. The ship is actually 90 years away from Homestead 2 when Jim finally visits the observatory. Because he doesn't know how to go back into hibernation, he rushes back to the concourse after realizing he woke up too early and sends a message to Earth asking for advice. His call to Earth would cost too much, and the communication system informs him that it would take 55 years to hear back. Jim is heartbroken. He makes his way to the ship's bar and finds someone else there. Something about him seems odd as he converses with the bartender. Jim discovers that the man is an android when he goes to get him a drink. It has the name Arthur. Jim wants to ask him more questions, but he is unable to even explain to the android how it is possible for him to arrive early. The following morning, Jim wakes up in his cabin and goes to the cantina, where he quickly learns that the majority of the items on the menu are only available to gold-class travelers. He orders a simple cup of coffee and works to repair his hibernation chamber. He manages to get it running once he has all the necessary tools, and then he lies down inside the pod. But nothing takes place. He then makes the decision to enter the crew's hibernation chambers using the tools he discovered. That also doesn't work. All over the ship, minor issues arise. Jim frequents the bar frequently to drink, but mostly to chat with Arthur. He is persuaded to enter one of the gold-class rooms and try to have some fun on the ship after the android offers him some advice. Jim explores every restaurant, game, and entertainment venue. But as time goes on, he starts to feel even worse about being there by himself. One day, while inebriated and aimlessly wandering through the hibernation pods, he accidentally enters an airlock containing spacesuits intended for spacewalks. Jim dons a suit before heading to the airlock. To open the airlock door, he pulls a lever and then presses a button. He is enthralled by the scenery once he has left the ship. He is the only conscious person there at that precise time. Jim, feeling devastated, releases the magnets from his boots and floats in space. He enters again, removes the suit, and returns to the airlock without it. When he is about to pull the lever to end it all, he changes his mind, runs back inside, and trips over a bottle. Jim gets to his feet and is immediately drawn to Aurora, a woman who is in one of the pods. He listens to her passenger interview and looks through her files in the directory as he falls in love with her. He was later observed sitting close to her pod and continuing to listen to her interviews. He's reading some of her writing back at the bar and chatting with Arthur about it. He becomes fixated on the irony of his situation. He wakes up early in search of a better life on another planet, but he never arrives. He finds the ideal woman, but she is out of his reach. Jim can't stop thinking about her, and he starts to consider waking her up as well. He discusses it with the android, but is unable to resolve the paradox. He would be abandoning her there with him to perish on the ship if he awakened her for his own gain. Jim initially decides against it, but as time passes, he changes his mind, until he decides otherwise one day. He finds her pod and is able to turn it on. He hides and returns to his room as she awakens and goes through the same process that he did. Later, in an effort to locate her, he goes to the main concourse. She is there, looking just as perplexed as he did a year ago. Jim takes her to the observatory and informs her that they are the only ones awake. Then he informs her that he is unable to reach the ship's crew or top management. Aurora panics and tries to return to her pod. When they arrive, Jim informs her that they are stranded because there is no specialized equipment on the ship that can assist them in returning to hibernation. He advises her to get some rest since she just came out of hibernation as they return to the concourse. She feels bad for him because he has to live alone on the ship for more than a year. Jim returns to the bar and feels bad about what he did. He asks Arthur to keep Aurora's awakening a secret from her. The next morning, Aurora awakens. She returns to the concourse and inquires about the hibernation pods at the automated information station. She meets Jim there, and the two of them go out for breakfast. The information desk is experiencing some sort of issue as they depart. When Aurora notices that Jim has been eating the same breakfast for over a year in the cantina, she orders him something from the gold class menu. They discuss the possibility of fixing the pods, but Aurora, in contrast to Jim, isn't prepared to give up just yet. She looks through the research materials and the hospital before arriving at the crew's hibernation quarters and attempting to force the doors open. Jim discovers more issues all over the ship. Aurora bemoans her life on the Avalon sometime later. She writes, runs around the ship, and swims in the pool as she grows more conscious of her predicament. Jim's story might be interesting, so she decides to interview him at the cantina. She queries his decision to move to the colony. Jim responds with company slogans at first, but goes on to say that he wants to be someone in the new world and start a life. They eventually arrive at the observatory, where Aurora at last reveals why she is there. She is one of the few people on the ship with a round-trip ticket. Her plan was to travel to Homestead 2 and spend a year living there before returning to Earth to become the first journalist to ever do so and pen the greatest story that has ever been written. Jim finds a way to make Aurora smile as she gradually gives up on finding a solution to their current predicament. He takes her to the movies, the basketball court, and dancing. Then he brings her to the bar so they can meet Arthur. She unwinds for a while before realizing their predicament. As he is left alone with the android, Jim is filled with regret over what he has done to her. When Aurora enters the observatory, he has made a miniature of the Chrysler building for her and is working on something else in the adjacent room. They go on a date at the bar a while later. During dinner, they converse about their personal lives. She reveals to him that when she was a teenager, her father passed away. Jim takes Aurora to the airlock after dinner, where they put on their spacesuits. Together, they take a spacewalk. Jim can now finally tell someone about that wonderful experience. They float in space together after Jim turns off the magnets on their boots. Once again inside, they share a passionate kiss before retiring to his cabin to spend the night together. Soon after, they begin cohabitating. Aurora settles in his room and starts writing about her time spent at sea. Together, they go jogging, eat, and sleep. Jim continues to explore the ship and discovers the hydroponics bay. He delivers flowers to Aurora. They visit the observatory to view a red giant that the ship happens to pass one day. Later that evening, they celebrate Aurora's birthday at the bar and in one of the ship's many restaurants. While Aurora stays in the bar talking to Arthur, Jim prepares the ring he made for her in the restroom. The android informs Aurora that Jim deliberately woke her up, not realizing he was still keeping that a secret. Jim reappears out of nowhere, and she confronts him in complete shock. She flees, furious and terrified. All of her belongings are gone when Jim returns to his cabin. The following day, he runs into her in the cantina, but as soon as he starts talking, she bolts. Aurora needs help badly. She visits Jim's cabin one night while kicking and punching him and expressing her desire to kill him. Jim tries to apologize and justify his actions to her over the phone because she keeps avoiding him. Aurora doesn't seem to mind when he tells her that he fell in love with her. He took her life, and she is unable to forgive him. One evening, while Jim is in his cabin, something else goes wrong. The main command shuts down when the ship encounters a critical error. Later, as he enters the elevator, it breaks down. Jim has planted a tree in the main concourse, which Aurora notices as she enters. She then makes her way to the cantina, where the food vending machine is also broken. Over the comms, the deck chief's voice can be heard asking who planted the tree, startling them both. Gus Mancuso is visible in the concourse as Jim's tree, where the two of them have just entered. They introduce themselves and explain the situation to the chief. He cannot comprehend how 3 pods could malfunction. Mancuso takes them to the bridge, where he realizes there is a problem with the ship, but manual verification of the data in the systems is required. The two of them inform Mancuso that ship malfunctions have been occurring more frequently as they leave the bridge after a robot nearly hits them. He tells them that shouldn't happen and demonstrates how to gather the information. Jim joins Mancuso there, and Mancuso checks on the pods. He understands what transpired with Aurora's pod. The deck chief thinks Jim's actions were terrible. Later, Aurora joins him at the bridge where he is reviewing the data that has been gathered. They discuss what happened to her pod, but he informs her that there is nothing he can do to fix it. Jim enters carrying the 16th damaged robot. Mancuso rests after experiencing hibernation sickness, but as he leaves, he coughs up blood. Aurora goes swimming because she is unable to sleep that night. She begins to drown as the ship's gravity suddenly changes, and the water from the pool moves along with her. She barely escapes alive as the gravity drive resets. While searching for Mancuso, they cross paths with one another. Back at the bridge, the 3 of them are slowly learning what has been happening to the ship. Mancuso discovers that something occurred 2 years ago that destroyed a crucial system. The entire ship is attempting to pick up the slack, so they need to identify and address the problem. The whole ship will be stranded if they don't fix it. Mancuso passes out as they search for the issue, so Jim and Aurora take him to the hospital. He is dying, and there's nothing that can be done to stop it or give him more time. The 3 of them eventually cross paths in the observatory, where Mancuso hands Jim his ID bracelet, orders them to fix the ship, and then promptly dies. The ship begins to tremble as the lights abruptly change to an alarming red color. They rush toward engineering after Jim tells Aurora he needs her assistance. But the gravity drive experiences yet another failure, and right away another that also affects Arthur. Jim turns him off. They eventually make it to engineering, where they begin looking for the issue. as they open the hatch after finding it in the power plant. Aurora is sucked inside. There is a breach in the hull there due to the asteroid. Even though Jim is also sucked in, he manages to hold on to the hatch as it keeps closing on him. He eventually falls in as well, but they are able to quickly close the gap. Jim discovers there are multiple breaches in the hull right away after resolving that issue. Following the meteor's path, the two of them discover that it struck the reactor control computer. Jim believes he can locate spare parts for it. They locate the component and replace it, but the reactor's venting procedure is still unsuccessful. They attempt it manually but fail once more. Jim realizes that in order to cool the reactor down, he must open the vent door from outside the ship. They both proceed to the airlock, and as he prepares to exit, he hands Aurora Mancuso's bracelet to her because he might not return. She assists him with the suit and urges him to return because she can't survive on the ship without him as he enters the airlock. Aurora returns to the reactor because the temperature there has reached dangerous levels. As Jim approaches the vent from the outside and notices the door, a bolt from the reactor shoots into her arm. He is attempting to open the vent door while the temperature in the reactor room rises. Soon after, he informs Aurora that he will need to manually hold the door open in order for the reactor to vent. He proceeds with the plan despite her opposition and instructs her to vent the reactor. She fights with him because she doesn't want him to perish, but when he insists that they must save the other people, she vents the reactor. Although the procedure is successful, Jim is pushed away, and his tether is broken by the reactor fumes. His suit's pressure is also decreasing. When Aurora is informed of what transpired, she reacts as quickly as she can to find another suit and bring the man inside. He offers her another apology. She dons a suit and flies out to meet him, but the length of her tether prevents her. Despite being pushed back, she manages to pull him in when she suddenly grabs hold of his tether. Jim is already dead when Aurora drags him into the medical facility. She overrides the medical procedures and revives Mancuso using the bracelet. Jim is revived by the medical pod, which completes the task automatically, and Aurora pardons him. Later, Aurora fixes Arthur, and Mancuso is properly buried in space. Jim brings her to the hospital and informs her that he has figured out how to convert the medical pod into a hibernation pod. She is instructed to board the pod and continue traveling there from there. She declines, though, and chooses to remain awake on board the ship with him, as is later made clear. Finally, Jim asks her to marry him, and they continue to live on the ship. The Avalon arrives at Homestead 288 years later. When the crew awakens, they discover the ship in an unforeseen condition. In her message, Aurora describes the life she and Jim led while the others were sleeping on the ship.